and I met some Muslims. I came across a brother and he invited me to his house, to stay in his house. So I ended up living with him for some time. I went to a Muslim wedding. I went to a Muslim funeral. I witnessed him and his mother and his family praying. We ate together, sitting on the floor, and all these things were amazing to me. His grandmother passed away, and she was 105 years old, and he was crying. I'm not crying because she's passed away. He said, she's a Muslim. He said, she goes to Jannah, inshallah. He said, I'm crying because she's a very old woman, and I wanted her to meet you so that she can make dua that you will become a Muslim. And that touched me. I was like, why is this so important for this man? Why is he crying? He's just lost his grandmother. He's not crying because she's passed away. He's crying because he wants me to be a Muslim.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, saudara Muslim. John Fontain adalah seorang mu'alaf asal Inggris. Dia aktif berdakwah di media sosial dan banyak membantu murid-murid Muslim di Afrika. Sejak kecil, John menyukai musik. Dia meniti karir sebagai penyanyi jazz dan hanya dalam beberapa tahun dia sudah merasa ada di puncak karirnya. Namun bukannya senang, ada kehambaan yang dia rasakan. Hal itu membuat John memutuskan untuk mendalami bidang lain, yaitu usaha berlian.
I was born and raised as a Christian. So from a very young age, I used to go to church. I was also into music. So I started to play the church organ. I played the ukulele, banjo. I played the trumpet. So I was very musical from a very young age. So in my teenage years, I got into singing. So from the age of 14, I was singing. And then when I became around 16, 17, I started to sing professionally as a job, singing in jazz clubs and cruise ships and football in Manchester United's ground and different places. It's fun, you know. In Jahiliyyah, my time before Islam, I felt like I'd got to the peak of where I could be in the music industry. You know, I wasn't going to be the #1 singer in the world. I just thought, well, I've done it. It was like I'd reached my goal, and it was an empty feeling. You know, when you've made it, you know, you've tried to work so hard to succeed in a particular field, and then all of a sudden you're at the top of where you can be, and then what? Am I going to do this for the rest of my life? It's not fulfilling. So this is why I started to look into business as well. I started to study diamonds, and that's when my journey took me to Africa and on to different things.
John dibesarkan dalam keluarga Kristen. Dia sangat yakin tentang keberadaan Tuhan. Namun ketika berumur 7 tahun, dia mendapat pengalaman yang membuatnya tidak lagi yakin dengan ajaran Kristen. Perjalanan bisnis John dalam usaha berliannya membuat dia sering mengunjungi Afrika. Di sana dia bertemu dengan lingkungan Muslim yang ramah yang mengubah pandangan John tentang Islam.
At the age of about 7 years old, I remember being in Sunday school in church. We had to write a song about God, and my song was called Jesus and God. And I remember the pastor, one of the youth workers, he took the piece of paper and changed the words. So originally my song was Jesus and God, and the pastor changed it to Jesus is God. And around 7 years old, I was like, what? You know, this was like a light bulb moment where I realized that I don't believe in this faith. I do not believe Jesus is God. You know, my concept of Jesus was that he's a man, he's a human being, he's a prophet of God, and there's no way I was going to accept that Jesus is God. So this was the first instance where I started to question, well, what is the right religion? Because I did believe in God, and my concept of God was what my concept of God is today. We can't imagine God. You know, he's one, he's something beyond our comprehension. But there was no way I was going to accept that Jesus is God. So this was shocking for me. From a young age, I knew, you know, what's going on. You know, all my family, my friends, my community, they're all following this religion, and it doesn't make sense. It was very eye-opening. I would say the first time I started to hear about Islam and think about it as a religion was 9/11. You know, that somebody had flew a plane into the World Trade Centers, and all I heard was the Muslims, it's Muslims, it's Muslims. Not knowing anything about Islam. All I thought I knew was that Islam is a terrorist religion, these people are evil, and that was kind of my first introduction. I also, at the age of 18, I traveled to Senegal in West Africa. And for those who don't know, Senegal is a Muslim country. When I was in Senegal, I was actually quite scared of Muslims initially because of 9/11, because I had many misconceptions about Muslims. So actually going to Senegal opened my mind. I realized, number one, that there's African Muslims. I'd never seen African Muslims. So I was really interested in understanding how did Islam come here, you know. And when I went to Senegal, this was the first time I actually heard the adhan. It was fascinating. You know, I was really happy to hear the call to prayer. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand the meaning. And I met some Muslims. I came across a brother who, at the time, he was working in the hotel, and he invited me to his house, to stay in his house. So I ended up living with him for some time. I went to a Muslim wedding, I went to a Muslim funeral, and I witnessed him and his mother and his family praying. We ate together, sitting on the floor, and all these things were amazing to me. But I wasn't convinced on Islam. So even though I liked the culture, I liked my experience, this wasn't enough to make me a Muslim. This just sparked my interest even more to it was kind of weird because I started to attack Islam by using Christianity. Even though I knew Christianity wasn't true, culturally I was still Christian. So I started to, try to find problems with Islam, spark discussion with some of the Muslims. But the more I researched, the more I questioned Islam, the more I was impressed about the teachings and the message of the Quran. And I guess I was willing to accept Islam. When I say willing to accept Islam, I mean I was willing to give Islam a chance because the Africans had a part to teach me about Islam. So I was 18 years old. This is 5 years before I converted. And while I was staying in the brother's house, who was a Muslim, his grandmother passed away. And she was 105 years old. And he was crying. He was sat on the bed crying. So I sat next to him. I put my arm around him. And I said, she'll go to a better place. And he said, I'm not crying because she's passed away. He said, she's a Muslim. He said, she goes to Jannah, inshallah. He said, I'm crying because she's a very old woman and I wanted her to meet you so that she can make dua that you will become a Muslim. And that touched me. I thought, me, Muslim? I'm not going to be a Muslim. What are you talking about? I didn't say that because he's still upset that his grandmother passed away. But this had an effect on me. I was like, why is this so important for this man? Why is he crying? He's just lost his grandmother. He's not crying because she's passed away. He's crying because he wants me to be a Muslim. And that was something that made me think, wow, this guy actually believes. He really believes in this religion.
Setelah 5 tahun mengenal Islam, tinggal bersama keluarga Muslim, John mulai menerima dan belajar mempraktikkan Islam. Seiring waktu, keraguan-raguan John tentang Islam hilang. Hingga akhirnya John bersyahadah di Mesir di hadapan temannya.
I eventually accepted Islam when I was 23 years old. I was doing some research, but again at the time I was not willing to give up singing. I was not willing to give up certain things, and I didn't know how to become a Muslim. In fact, I didn't know I could be a Muslim. I thought Islam was something you're born with, something you inherit from your parents. I'd never known they were converts to Islam. It wasn't until when I was researching, I came across videos with people like Abdurrahim Green and Yusuf Estes and other people, converts, when I realized, wow, there's actually a lot of English and American people who are accepting Islam. I was in Egypt at the time, and I went to a mosque and I asked my friend to teach me how to pray, and he refused. He said, no. He said, you're not a Muslim. I said, well, I believe, I fasted Ramadan, I tried to pray. He said, okay, you have to say the Shahada. I asked him, what is the Shahada? So he told me the Shahada, and I became a Muslim. I felt like a big weight was taken off my shoulders. I felt clean, and alhamdulillah,